Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do the first part of my January wrap up for 2021. So far in January I have read 5 books and I've really enjoyed my reading so far this year, and I think it got off to a great start. The first week or so was a little bit slow. It just took me a while to finish my first book, but since then I feel like I've had some really nice steady progress with all the books that I've read, so I can't wait to tell you about all of them now. So as I had already mentioned in my 2021 5-star predictions, the first book I wanted to read this year was Hamnet by Maggie, as that was on this list, and this was just one I was very eager to start off this year, to read this year, and I just thought, seeing as I thought it was going to be a 5-star prediction, I had a really good feeling about it. I wanted to start my year off on high by reading this book, and it definitely delivered everything I wanted it to. This book is historical fiction and we are following this family. At the start of this book we basically know that one of the twins is very sick, and her brother Hamlet is trying to find someone to help her because he doesn't know where all the adults are, and from there we kind of start figuring out who this family are, their kind of history, how the mother and father met each other, the relationship between everyone in the family, and we also kind of come to figure out that the father of this family is Shakespeare. This book is just so beautifully written. There's just a way of describing things and people's emotions. They're all just so gorgeous, and just the way Maggie played with kind of delivering these people's stories and the type of people they were, and this like really subtle magic within the story as well. I just really loved, and it just definitely was the type of writing that I loved. It was very evocative at times, and then there's parts of it that were like so simple, and there was no like big words or crazy kind of long flowery descriptions used, but there was just some simplicity of the writing as well that was just absolutely beautiful for me. I definitely felt like a lot of emotion in this story, and there's definitely a sense in the story as well that like you know that Hamlet is going to die, and it's just basically leading up to that point, and there's just there's like a grief from the very start in a way, and you were sad from the very start because you know how it's going to end, and you're kind of hoping it somehow won't end up like that. I think just like really beautiful about this story as well, and how through grief there kind of comes this acceptance of what has happened, and then this like living again, kind of come out of grief and just kind of continue living their life while still remembering the person they lost, but also kind of enjoying the simple happiness that life just brings. One particular chapter in this book that is basically talking about the fever that Hamlet's twin gets. This chapter about how that fever came to England, and it basically starts with a flea on a monkey that is then brought to a boy, and how that boy is connected to a glass blower in Venice, and how all of these things combine to eventually bring this fever to the doorstep of Hamlet and his family. And the way that chapter is like told, and the way these people are like these really insignificant, they're seemingly these really insignificant people in the course of this book, but it's just so good the way it's written. I just really enjoyed that. So obviously this was a 5 out of 5 stars for me, as I predicted, and I'm really glad it was, and that I was able to start my year off on such a high, as I said. So I definitely loved this, and yeah, it was absolutely gorgeous, and I definitely recommend it. The next book unfortunately was not so good, and it was an audiobook I was reading from the end of December, and I finished it in January, and that was Number 1 Chinese Restaurant by Lillian Lee. This is kind of I don't know how to explain this, because to be honest I felt like nothing really actually happens in this book, but you're basically following this family who own this Chinese restaurant, I think in Maryland, and the father started this restaurant and it kind of became quite known, and it has like regular customers, and you know, it's doing well. It's not like absolutely amazing, but like it's doing fairly well. And the sons of this family now are grown up. One of the sons is kind of the manager of the restaurant, and the other son is trying to kind of break away and start his own restaurant, which he calls kind of like an Asian fusion restaurant. He wants something more modern and more kind of, I don't know, just more than his family restaurant. And looking at the dynamics within this family and the complicated relationships everyone has with each other, but then you're also looking at the long-time employees of the family restaurant and their connections to each other. So as I said, it kind of felt like not much happened in this book. It's definitely more of a character study of everyone and a study of the relationships between people, but this is definitely also one of those books where like everyone is just horrible, and I just didn't really like anyone's character or their voices and like what they were doing. I felt like there wasn't even much like character growth with any of the characters, and the only character that was nice, her name was Nan, she was the only kind of actually decent character in this book, and everyone basically walked all over her for the entirety of the book. And even at the end of the book I still felt she didn't really get any kind of like happy ever after, or like any real peace or joy with what had happened in the rest of the book. She was just kind of left just, I don't know, trying to help everyone else and not actually help herself. There were just some like passages in this book as well that like really kind of repulsed me at some points. There was one scene that had to do with like toenail clipping, and it was supposed to be this scene of like tenderness and love between these two characters, and it was just gross. I just really didn't enjoy listening to that at all. And for a book that's like centered around a Chinese restaurant, there's actually like a weird lack of like food and food descriptions in this book. I would have really liked there to be like these gorgeous descriptions of like Chinese food and what they were serving in the restaurant, and there was like a little bit of that, but there wasn't really a lot of it. So I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars, and unfortunately I wouldn't recommend it to people. I just don't think there's anything in this book really that is exciting in any way. Yeah, it just was a bit of a flop. The Lonely Fajita by Abigail Mann was my next book on my list, and this one I've had on my NetGalley list for a while, but I definitely wanted to read it because I think just at the moment in time, I think everyone is back in like some form of new lockdown with COVID, and I definitely think like the cover of this book kind of sums up how everyone feels at the moment. I definitely have been feeling like that. The book definitely is funny. This is about a girl called Alyssa. She's about 26 years old, and she is working in London. She's like working kind of in this like internship social media manager job for this startup tech company, which is kind of doing a dating app. And even though she's like a social media manager, she actually like isn't really getting paid anything but expenses, and she's actually like losing money while working this job basically. She has kind of like a shitty relationship. She's not in a really good like home situation, and then basically she's on the verge of like losing everything. Ends up signing up to this scheme called elder care, which is where she will move in with an older person who needs a little bit of companionship and just someone else in the house, and she's going to be able to move in there rent free in return that she is just kind of a companion to the person that she's living with. So she meets this older lady who she moves in with, and she kind of has Annie on board to help with her, and she kind of starts to try and help Annie's life as well. And it's just like this fun novel that I just really enjoyed reading. It was quite light and simple, but it was also quite funny in different parts of the book. Like Alyssa is just like an absolute hot mess, and she definitely makes your life seem great because she is just like failing in like every part that you could imagine. But there's definitely parts of this book that like there was several parts of this book where it made me like chuckle to myself, and I just smiled while reading this book, which is exactly what I wanted it to do. There were definitely parts of the book that I felt like could have been broadened out more, or there could have been more emphasis on different things. I actually would have liked Alyssa to have moved in with Annie a lot sooner in the book, and we could have had like a lot more time both with Annie but also with her neighbours who kind of come into the book a little bit more near the end of it, and I actually would have liked to have gotten to know them more. I definitely really enjoyed this, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I've also already got Abigail Mann's new book on my Kindle that I'm hoping to read soon because that's out this year, and I just really enjoyed her writing, so I wanted to read more. Then the next book I read was actually part of a project I've decided to start, which is to try and read some of the oldest books that I kind of had hauled on my channel that I still haven't read, because I do have a few books from my Kindle and on my physical bookshelves that I just got when I first started BookTube, and mostly that I bought because of BookTube that I still haven't read. One of these books was Sugar by Deirdre Riordan. And this is a YA contemporary book about a young girl called Sugar. I think she's about 16 or 17 in this novel. Basically, she is very, very overweight, and overweight to the point where it's very dangerous for her health. She would, like, say it would probably be like borderline obese, and she herself, like, she is in a family where it just seems like they're all quite overweight, and her mother is to the point where she's clinically obese that she can't actually move from her bed. She's like bedbound, and Sugar is kind of acting as her carer, but she's also in like this like toxic home situation because her mother, even though she's caring for her, is a very abusive person towards her emotionally, and then her brother, who also lives there, is emotionally and physically abusive towards Sugar. So she is just like in a really bad place. She binge eats to kind of deal with her emotions and the different things that she's going through, and then she meets this boy called Evan, who kind of becomes a friend. She's never had a proper friend before, and he kind of becomes her best friend and a little bit of a romantic interest. And through Evan kind of getting Sugar out of the house more and being able to like just to do more things and just to be a little bit happier, she starts basically seeing that she's worth a lot more than she thought she was, and it gives her a break to really deal with her emotions and start thinking about why she acts the way she does and why she eats the way she does, and start making those different changes to her lifestyle that will like gradually hopefully make her a little bit better. So I did really enjoy this book. There are parts of it that were like slightly simple and slightly cheesy. The romance part of it is definitely like a little bit on the cheesier side, but Sugar herself is just a character that you really want to root for. I really liked Sugar as a character, and she's someone who you just feel for so much because there's so many different parts of her life that is just so horrible. The bullying in this book is like at an extreme level that you wonder if like that would actually happen, but of course it would, because there are people in the world that are like that and will treat people like that. And one of the things I did like is, while her kind of gradual weight loss was attributed to Evan and her relationship with him, you could see how she kind of worked it out herself, that one of the reasons why she ate and one of the reasons why she turned to food the way she did was because of these emotions she was feeling because of the toxic home situation she was in. And she like kind of was able to identify that, and she does go to counselling at some point in this book, which is really, really good to see. And she doesn't just change her habits overnight. It's definitely like a work in progress from the start to the end of the book, that it is like a progress for her. It's not something that she is able to just like click her fingers and be completely better. This book definitely like surprised me with the emotion I felt at different points in it, and for that I just really enjoyed it, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I do think for a YA contemporary with a fat main character, it does it quite well, despite some of the like harder themes in this book around bullying. There's also an attempted sexual assault in this book as well, which obviously is not nice to read. But there's so many parts of this book that are lovely, and as I said, Sugar is just a lovely character as well. I will say that I don't think this is own voices when it comes to fat rep, so if you are looking for own voices, I'm not sure this is it. But as for me personally as a reader, though I can't speak from an own voices experience, I think it did well, and I've seen other reviews on Goodreads who have said this book does like fat rep very well. So yeah. And then the last book I want to talk about I finished yesterday, and that was Sealed by Naomi Boot. This is also a audiobook that I read, and this is quite a short audiobook. It's only about 7 hours long. I think it's only about 170 pages in like physical book form, and this is like a speculative fiction / horror novel, and we are following a character who's pregnant. She's about 36 weeks pregnant, so she's at the very end of her pregnancy, and she and her partner have basically moved out to the Australian bush to like do their last few weeks of pregnancy, and maybe like during her maternity leave stay there with the baby. And through Alice, who's the main character, through her kind of her narration of the story, we start learning that like there's something like weird going on in Australia and in the world itself, and there seems to be like this particular type of like skin condition / growing pandemic, possible pandemic, that is starting to crop up more and more. And it's basically this skin condition called cutis, and what it does is basically your skin starts to like seal over different parts of your body, so people will wake up and like their ears will be sealed over with skin and they won't be able to hear anything properly, or like their nostrils will be sealed over, and in like really, really bad cases, eyes and mouth and your whole face will literally be like sealed with skin. Like that's in like extreme cases. And this seems to have been like kind of something that's like growing a little bit, and Alice has become very, very obsessive over this, and this is one of the reasons why her partner has made her move out to this place, so she doesn't have to think about it being in the city, and they can kind of like move out, be a bit more peaceful, and kind of just focus on them and their baby and when the baby is born. But when they move out there, something just doesn't feel right. Something is weird, and there's like this growing like unease about the place. There's just like loads of different things that Alice is like spotting, but at the same time us as readers, you don't know if it's legit, these different things that she's seeing or that she's picking up on, or is it that she's just paranoid because she is particularly obsessed about things to the point where she's almost like a conspiracy theorist. She gets really obsessed about like things that could be polluted and like chemicals she might be breathing into her body, things like plastic wrapped around vegetables she has like a thing with, and everything has to be like really clean. While like previously reading something like this, it would have been like, you would have been like, oh, would people really get like that? Would they get obsessive? Would they do these things? Would they spread these rumors? We're now obviously living in a time of COVID and a pandemic. It's very easy to see how people can get scared to that level, where they start becoming these type of like conspiracy theorists, or indeed just become obsessive over these really, really little things. So some of her fear you can definitely understand. This book again is something where there's not a lot of like action in it. It's basically you're just following Alice's few days in the Australian bush as like the birth of her child comes nearer and nearer, and there's this growing sense of unease and tension that's building and building and building in the book, until the end of it, when everything kind of erupts. And I did definitely really enjoy my reading experience of this and that atmospheric build up in the novel. The last kind of chapter or so of this book was like super intense. There is some mild body horror in this book. I didn't find any of it particularly bad. There is like a particularly like horrific birth scene near the end, and because of Alice's like fears and like things have just like, there's different elements involved in making the birth as horrific as it does end up being, but it's also all connected to her fear as well, and her kind of paranoia about things too, and it's just all connects in really, really well. But there are definitely scenes there that could be a little bit, if you do have kind of a weak stomach, that could get you a little bit. So I would definitely just generally recommend don't read this book while eating, because I definitely made that mistake, and there was a point where I was like, maybe not. So yeah, I did really enjoy this. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and yeah, definitely for like an audiobook or just a short read and one that could be quite engrossing, I would recommend picking it up. So that's everything I've read so far in January. Please let me know if you guys have read any of these books, what you guys think of them, what books you guys have been reading, have you had any 5-star books yet in January. So thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time.